So let's dive into a really fascinating question about one of ancient history's great powers. Were the Achaeans the brilliant architects of Greek religion as we know it, or were they its executioners? Did they build the temples we all recognize, or did they just build them on top of the graves of an older, maybe even wilder faith? This right here is the central puzzle of the Achaeans. We're talking about the Bronze Age civilization that dominated Greece for nearly 700 years. Their influence literally helped shape the DNA of Western spirituality. But the story of how they did it, well, it's a tale of both unbelievable creation and, at the same time, systematic destruction. All right, so here's our game plan for unpacking this. We're going to look at their constructive side, the builders. Then we'll flip the coin and look at their destructive role as suppressors. After that, we'll dive into a really cool case study to see it all in action before we finally try to figure out what their ultimate legacy really was. Okay, first up, let's look at the Achaeans as the great architects. You have to imagine that before them, religious beliefs were kind of all over the place, just a patchwork of local folk traditions. The Achaeans came in and brought order, discipline, and maybe most importantly, a solid structure. Now, what they did was totally revolutionary. They took religion and plugged it directly into the state's economic and administrative machine. And how do we know this? Well, it's pretty incredible. We have their accounting records. These linear B tablets, which are literally just baked clay spreadsheets, list out everything: offerings, land grants to priests, sacred inventories, all managed by a central palace bureaucracy. Religion basically became a department of the government. And this, right here, this is basically the corporate org chart for the Achaean faith. These aren't just some vague spiritual titles. They are official job descriptions. You've got the Wenox, the priest king. Think of him as the CEO. Below him, you have priests and priestesses who are like mid-level managers handling land and resources. There are even designated servants of the god. This just goes to show how they treated religion as a formal institution, a system built to last. And this, well, this is their most famous contribution. The gods themselves. The names we all associate with classical Greece: Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, the whole crew. Their names first show up in these Achaean palace records. They basically took all these scattered local deities and organized them into a single, coherent pantheon. They created the mythological skeleton that would prop up Western culture for thousands of years. But this act of creation cast a very, very long shadow. Yeah, because for every structure you build, something else often gets torn down. So now we have to flip the coin. We have to look at the Achaeans as censors, the ones who paved over an entirely different spiritual world that was already there. So the crucial idea here from a scholar named Jane Harrison is that this wasn't some friendly merger of beliefs. Not at all. This was more like a theological conquest. The theory is that the Achaeans basically imposed their sky god-focused patriarchal system right on top of the older, earth-based faiths of the people who were there before them, like the Minoans. And just look at this comparison. It's like night and day. The older faith was chthonic. That means focused on the earth, the underworld, caves. The deities were often formless or animal-shaped, and it was all about nature goddesses and the cycles of fertility. The Achaean system, totally different. It was Iranic, focused on the sky. Its god looked like humans, and its goal wasn't harmony with nature. Nope, its goal was social order and political power. This shift in thinking had huge consequences, especially for women. I mean, look at that number, minus 70%. Now, while those linear B tablets show that priestesses still held property and status, the rise of this new warrior-focused dogma started to systematically chip away at their central role. And even though that 70% is a modern guess, it points to a dramatic move away from a goddess-centered world to a male-dominated pantheon. And this might be their darkest legacy. The great scholar Walter Burkert argued that the Achaeans essentially took the raw violence of the hunt and formalized it into state-sponsored sacrifice. Religion became centered on this endless cycle of killing and ritual atonement. It's a theme of sanctified violence that would echo, really darkly, in the intense and often terrifying rituals of the later mystery cults. Okay, so let's zoom in a bit and see this dynamic in action. If we look at a sacred place, some sacred art, and the afterlife, we can see exactly how the Achaeans were playing the part of both architect and censor at the very same time. Okay, let's take Eleusis, probably the most famous site for mystery cults in all of history. What did archaeologists find there? An Achaean-era building, Megron B, right underneath the main hall. So there's the constructive part. They physically cemented this location as a sacred spot. They put a pin in the map and said, this place matters, creating a site of memory that would last for centuries. But here's the question. Just because they built the stage, does that mean it was for the same play? Almost certainly not. The evidence from their building, things like animal bones, points to elite feasts and state-run sacrifices. That is a world away from what the Eleusinian mysteries later became, something focused on individual salvation and a deep, personal mystical experience. The Achaeans kept the place, but they likely erased its original purpose. When it came to art, the Achaeans were brilliant spin doctors. They'd borrow these powerful symbols from older Minoan culture and the Near East, but they'd completely repurpose them. For example, the Minoan snake goddess, a figure of raw, wild, natural power, becomes a symbol of those same chthonic forces being tamed and controlled by the palace. They used a borrowed visual language to write a brand new story, one of cosmic order firmly under their control. And finally, we get to death. The Achaeans completely transformed burial. It went from simple communal graves to these magnificent tholos tombs, these giant stone beehives packed with gold, armor, and weapons, all for a single warrior elite. They turned death from a shared, communal passage into a grand theater of individual status and power. And that was a profoundly disruptive change that basically invented the very idea of the heroes, whose cults would later pop up all over Greece. So, what's the final verdict then? Architect or censor? Well, the real answer, the most interesting one, is that the tension between these two roles is what made Greek spirituality so incredibly deep and dynamic. On the one hand, their resume as architects is pretty impressive, right? They gave religion an institutional and economic backbone. They established the physical locations for sacred sites. They gave us the names of the gods. And they built a symbolic language that would last. They basically built the house that Greek religion would live in for 1,000 years. But, and this is a huge but, in building that house, they walled off the wild garden of the past. They suppressed goddess-focused traditions, buried the connection to the earth's raw power, and turned religion into a tool for the elite, one that was centered on violence. And this is the crucial takeaway. The incredible depth of later Greek esotericism, the mystery cults, Orphism, the followers of Dionysus, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was a direct reaction to the Achaean system. It was a creative rebellion trying to rediscover everything that had been lost, the personal experience, the connection to nature, the spiritual path of the individual, not just the state. So in the end, they were both. They absolutely forged the vessel of Greek religion, but by making it so rigid, they paradoxically created this intense spiritual thirst that all those later movements would desperately try to quench. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Sometimes the most profound spiritual traditions aren't born from harmony. Sometimes they're forged in the fire of what was lost, suppressed, and had to be rediscovered.